Helena moved through her days with the quiet precision of someone who had learned to fold her emotions the way she folded old costumes, carefully, avoiding wrinkles that might reveal too much. At 50, she carried the weight of time not as an enemy, but as a witness. The city around her, with its narrow streets coated in the smell of sea salt and its theater standing like an aging guardian, reflected something of her own landscape. She had long understood that the world softened toward men as they grew older, while sharpening its gaze toward women like her, measuring every new line on the skin, every softened contour, as if it were evidence of displacement. The theater, however, never judged her. It breathed with her, exhaled when she exhaled, and accepted her presence as if she were part of its wood and dust. When she unlocked its doors in the late afternoons, the sound of the heavy metal bar scraping open echoed like an invitation into a place where she was not invisible. The red seats, faded in patches from years of use, stretched before her like a patient audience waiting to be awakened. The curtains smelled faintly of moisture and fabric dye, a scent that clung to her clothes and reassured her that she still belonged somewhere. Helena spent her mornings teaching literature in the local school, a job she performed with quiet dignity. Her students rarely saw the woman she had once been, braver, louder, full of edges that invited both admiration and trouble. Life had filed many of those edges down. Her marriage had finished that work. The divorce left her with a house too silent and a heart too careful. But she carried on, keeping her softness tucked behind routines that required little risk. She wore her hair in practical waves, tied loosely when she worked, and dressed in earth tones that blended well with the chalk dust of the classroom. What she did not allow herself to express during the day found space in the evenings. The theater group she directed was small, made up of volunteers who carried their own share of hopes, frustrations, and unpolished dreams. She guided them with firm patience, arranging scenes, adjusting tones, helping them discover layers they did not know they possessed. In those moments, she often forgot her age. Her hands moved with certainty. Her voice settled into a rhythm that commanded attention without raising itself. She felt alive, not because she acted, but because she shaped stories and breathed life into characters who dared feel more than she allowed herself to. Still, even within this refuge, she could not entirely escape the subtle reminders of time. When she walked past the mirrors backstage, their unforgiving lights highlighted every shadow beneath her eyes, every line etched by years of pushing through disappointment. She had learned not to linger there. Mirrors, she believed, were designed to measure what the world valued, not what the soul carried. And in her soul, she knew she still had depth, but she rarely allowed herself to imagine that depth could be seen by anyone else. Her evenings ended the same way they began, with the creak of the theater door closing behind her, the distant crash of waves against the shore, and the quiet ache of longing she refused to name. Not for youth. That chapter had been lived and closed, but for the sensation of being chosen, noticed, and cherished again. She had convinced herself such desires belonged to the past, the way outdated props were kept in the basement storage, dusty and untouched. But beneath that resignation, something restless still flickered. She felt it in the way her chest tightened when she watched younger actors rehearse scenes of first love, in the envy she tried not to acknowledge when they spoke fearlessly about the future, and in the small tremors of memory that surfaced whenever she passed couples on the street. She would tell herself it was enough to mentor others, enough to be respected, enough to love the arts and keep her independence. And some days she believed it. Yet the truth was simpler and far less forgiving. Helena missed being seen, not politely acknowledged, not admired from a distance for her talent or wisdom, but truly seen, in the way that makes a person rethink the shape of their own existence. She ignored that truth because it felt indulgent, almost foolish. And so she moved through her routine, locked within the quiet dignity she had cultivated, unaware that the stage, her refuge, was about to become the place where her carefully guarded life would fracture. She did not foresee the return of someone who once observed her with timid curiosity, someone whose absence she had barely registered years ago, someone who now walked with a confidence shaped by adulthood. She had no idea that the next time she crossed the threshold of the theater, the air would feel different. Not because the place had changed, but because she had. For now, Helena only knew the familiar comfort of solitude, the predictable rhythm of rehearsals, and the silent acceptance of a life that asked little and returned little. She did not yet know that a single presence would unravel what she thought was settled, reawakening emotions she believed time had permanently dimmed. When Lucas stepped into the theater for the first time in years, Helena sensed a disturbance before she even recognized the source. The air shifted, as if a gust of youth had entered a room accustomed to the slower breaths of routine. She turned toward the doorway with the expectation of seeing another new volunteer, someone uncertain, hopeful, or simply curious. Instead, she found a face she had known long before she stopped expecting surprises from life. Lucas had been one of her students a decade earlier, quiet in posture but intense in observation. He had always carried a certain inward flame, the kind that often goes unnoticed until it is fully grown. Now, at 28, that flame was no longer shy. It had settled into his expression, his stance, the way he took in the theater as if it were a place he had been missing without admitting it. Helena felt time press against her chest, not painfully, but with a kind of awe. It was strange to see someone whose adolescence she remembered standing before her as a man, taller, broader in presence, and unmistakably comfortable in his own skin. She greeted him with composed politeness, though internally she sifted through memories of a student who used to stay after class to ask about plays, narratives, and the emotional depth behind literary choices. He had possessed a quiet hunger for meaning, the kind that she had once admired because it reminded her of who she had been before disappointments reshaped her boundaries. Lucas looked around the theater with warm recognition, not nostalgia, but appreciation. He seemed to see the aging seats and peeling paint with affection rather than criticism, as if he understood the beauty of things that carried history. And when his eyes moved to Helena, something in his expression softened, not with pity, but with a respect so sincere it unsettled her. She noticed immediately the ease with which he stepped into the group. During the first rehearsal, while others stumbled through warm-ups or whispered jokes, Lucas observed with an attentiveness that felt almost protective. He responded to her instructions with the kind of trust that bypassed hesitation. When she corrected a gesture or proposed a new emotional direction, he absorbed it like someone receiving a gift rather than a critique. Helena was used to being listened to as an authority figure, but Lucas listened differently. He listened as though her words mattered beyond technique, as if her presence alone shaped the atmosphere. That awareness stirred something inside her, an old warmth she quickly pushed back into the quiet corners of herself. Throughout the evening, she tried to maintain the steady composure expected of her, yet she could not ignore the awareness that developed every time she sensed Lucas nearby. The sound of his footsteps, the way he adjusted his breathing before entering a scene, the way he watched her from across the stage when she explained the emotional spine of a character. It all created a subtle hum beneath her ribs. She told herself she was imagining it, that her mind was embellishing simple courtesy into something meaningful. Still, the sensation persisted. Between scene changes, while she reviewed notes or rearranged props, Helena occasionally glimpsed Lucas speaking with other members of the group. Even in those moments, his attention would flicker toward her, not in the nervous glances of someone seeking approval, but in the grounded awareness of someone who simply noticed her, someone who saw her. The others seemed to accept him quickly, impressed by his composure and his willingness to commit fully to even the simplest exercises. But what struck Helena most was the absence of the arrogance often found in young actors. Lucas did not display himself. He offered himself. His presence was quiet, yet unmistakably steady, as though he had walked into the building with an understanding of the emotional weight it carried for her. By the end of rehearsal, Helena felt a mixture of fatigue and a strange, unfamiliar anticipation. She could not place the source of this feeling, not fully. Perhaps it was the way Lucas thanked her with a sincerity that lingered after he spoke. Perhaps it was the way he walked out of the theater with the unhurried confidence of someone who intended to return. Or perhaps it was the way her heart had responded, subtle yet undeniable, like a string that had not been touched in years vibrating at the slightest contact. She watched him leave, the door closing behind him with a softness that belied the shift he had brought into her world. She told herself it was nothing, just an echo of an old teacher-student connection. But somewhere deep within her, a quiet pulse of possibility began to form, a sensation she did not yet dare name. Helena did not know it yet, but Lucas's return was not a coincidence, nor was it fleeting. It was the beginning of a gravitational pull she would resist, fear, and eventually surrender to. For now, she only knew that the theater felt different after he left. Not emptier, just changed. The days that followed brought a quiet transformation to the rehearsals, one that Helena felt before she fully understood. Lucas became a constant presence, not intrusive, not demanding, simply steady, like a tide that rose a little higher each evening. His movements on stage adapted quickly to her direction, but it was the stillness between scenes that unsettled her the most. There was something in the way he carried himself, something attentive and patient, as though he were learning not only the piece they were rehearsing, but the contours of her inner world as well. Helena noticed the details before she admitted them. The way he remained after exercises to tidy stray props without being asked. The way he listened to her explanations with the softness of someone absorbing more than technique. The way he smiled, not broadly, but in a quiet upward curve that suggested understanding rather than charm. She tried to dismiss these small observations, telling herself they meant nothing. Yet she could not ignore the warmth that rose in her chest each time she sensed him approaching. During one rehearsal, as she guided the group through a particularly emotional sequence, Helena found herself describing the fragile courage required to embody vulnerability on stage. Her voice wavered for an instant, revealing more of herself than she intended. She rarely allowed her emotions to seep through her instruction, preferring to keep her personal history walled off from the creative space. But something about the scene, about the mirrored wounds between character and creator, left her more exposed than she wished. Lucas noticed. She felt it without needing to look at him. The others followed her guidance with varying levels of focus, but Lucas absorbed it with an intensity that bordered on reverence. It unnerved her. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her, the tiredness hidden beneath her restraint, the yearning she had learned to silence, the remnants of a woman who once believed she had a place in someone's heart. Between scenes, the group scattered across the stage, adjusting costumes and murmuring reviews of their own performances. Helena moved toward the wings to make notes. As she did, Lucas passed near her, close enough that she felt the trace of warmth radiating from his skin. He did not touch her. He did not speak, but something in the nearness made her pulse tighten, as though time had briefly shifted its pattern around them. Helena forced her attention back to her clipboard. She wrote comments with deliberate precision, though her hand trembled slightly. She reminded herself of the distance she needed to keep, the professionalism expected of her. She had lived too long with the consequences of misplaced hope to risk letting emotion cloud her judgment. And yet, even with these warnings echoing in her thoughts, she found herself recalling incidents from Lucas's school days, times when he lingered after class to ask about symbolism, or when he defended her interpretations during discussions that had grown too spirited. She remembered the quiet loyalty in his eyes. She remembered wondering, just once, what would become of him. She had not expected their paths to cross again. Life rarely returned what it had taken from her. But Lucas's presence now stirred a part of her she believed had settled into silence. The feeling was not simply attraction, though she could not deny the physical awareness that pulsed gently beneath her restraint. It was something deeper, a sense of being witnessed. Lucas seemed to notice the subtleties others overlooked, the way she pinched the bridge of her nose when fatigue crept in, the way she straightened her spine before giving critiques, the way she exhaled through her mouth when she needed to anchor herself. Each rehearsal drew them closer, not by intention, but by rhythm. Their paths overlapped in small, wordless exchanges. He handed her a pen she dropped. She adjusted the cuff of his costume when he missed a fast change. He offered a silent nod when she looked uncertain about a scene. She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder during a moment of artistic frustration, and the contact lingered in her mind long after it ended. Not because it was improper, but because it reminded her of a familiarity she had long denied herself. The other members of the group noticed something, though they could not name it. They saw the effortless way he interpreted her direction, the respect that shaped his posture, the quiet devotion that made him arrive early and leave late. They attributed it to ambition or admiration, but Helena sensed that it ran deeper than that. She felt it in the way Lucas looked at her, not like a student looking at a mentor, but like a man recognizing a truth others were too distracted to see. Helena tried to distance herself emotionally, but her resolve weakened each time Lucas approached with that silent steadiness. He did not flirt. He did not grandstand. He simply existed in a way that made her feel present again, seen again. It frightened her. It softened her. It rewrote lines she had drawn long ago to keep her heart safe. At the end of one rehearsal, as the group dispersed and the stage fell back into its familiar quiet, Helena lingered alone near the edge of the spotlight. She watched dust particles floating lazily through the air, glowing faintly in the light. She exhaled deeply, trying to ground herself in the stillness. Lucas, gathering his belongings nearby, glanced toward her with that same attentive kindness. Their eyes met for a brief, suspended moment. She looked away first, not because she wanted to, because she was afraid of wanting to. Lucas did not push. He simply nodded, a gesture filled with a warmth she did not dare accept. But the acknowledgement settled into her chest like a secret. And as she closed the theater that night, Helena sensed a truth she was not ready to face. The distance age had placed between them was thinning, softened not by recklessness, but by something quiet, patient, and undeniably real. The shift began subtly. At first it was nothing more than a lingering glance from one of the younger actresses, a quick whisper exchanged behind a prop rack, or an awkward silence that appeared whenever Helena entered a conversation. These small disturbances brushed against her awareness like faint drafts seeping through a closed window. She tried to ignore them. She had grown accustomed to the occasional immaturity of amateur performers. But as days passed, the currents grew stronger, more pointed, no longer contained in the shadows. She sensed the change most acutely in the dressing rooms. Mirrors lined the walls, bright with bulbs that highlighted every imperfection. Helena had long avoided looking into them longer than necessary, aware of the way their harsh lights clung to the fine lines around her eyes and the subtle sag in her jaw. Now, as she crossed the room, the reflections around her seemed multiplied, her own face surrounded by half-hidden glances bouncing off the glass. She overheard fragments, not full sentences, just enough to ignite doubt. Words like entrée demise, attention, and differenza floated through the air with the sharpness of broken glass. She pretended she did not hear. Pretending was something she had mastered, yet the whispers clung to her. They followed her down hallways and echoed in her mind as she rehearsed blocking notes. Her throat tightened each time she sensed someone watching her walk across the stage. She felt the scrutiny she had worked so hard to avoid. It was not admiration or respect. It was suspicion mingled with cruelty, the type of gaze that transformed ordinary gestures into weapons. And at the center of their curiosity was Lucas. His closeness to her, though innocent, though professional, though carefully measured, had become an unspoken subject. Helena saw the way others interpreted their interactions, the way their eyes sharpened when Lucas responded too quickly to her instructions, or when he positioned himself instinctively near her during breaks. They did not see the years of dedication she had given to the craft. They did not see the internal restraint that shaped her behavior. They saw only what they wanted, a story to feed their insecurities. Helena tried to create distance. She adjusted her posture. She shortened her corrections during rehearsal. She made her tone firmer, colder, more detached. These defenses built a brittle shell around her, but they did little to stop the susurros. If anything, her stiffness made them more curious. And when she stood in front of the mirror at home, she felt their whispers reflected back at her in the exaggerated contours of her aging face. Time, once merely a companion, now felt like an adversary. She noticed every mark she had dismissed before, the softness beneath her chin, the lines on her neck. the quiet fatigue beneath her eyes. She tried lifting her hair, pressing the skin at her temples, experimenting with angles that might soften the truth, but the mirror refused to lie. She felt foolish. She felt exposed. And she felt angry at herself for caring. Meanwhile, Lucas seemed unaware, or perhaps he was simply refusing to let the rumors shape his behavior. He continued rehearsing with the same dedication, offering Helena the same attentiveness, the same warm nods of acknowledgement. His constancy became another source of turmoil within her. She wanted him to pull away for both their sakes. She wanted him to stop looking at her with that unwavering respect that made the whispers seem even louder, but she also feared the emptiness that would come if he did. One evening, after a particularly tense rehearsal, Helena lingered alone in the dressing room. She stared at her reflection, illuminated harshly by the bright bulbs. The image stared back with exhaustion. With vulnerability she refused to verbalize. She touched her cheek gently, not with vanity but with grief, mourning the woman she used to be and the woman she believed she was allowed to become. Her thoughts drifted to Lucas, the memory of his steady gaze, the calm assurance he carried, the way he saw her without flinching. That memory brought a wave of warmth, followed immediately by fear. She wondered how he perceived her, not just as a director, not just as a former mentor, but as a woman. Did he see the lines? The tiredness? The fears she tried to mask beneath professionalism? Or did he see something beneath it, something she no longer recognized? The whispers grew bolder in the following days. A misplaced smile became evidence. A shared look became gossip. Even her silences became suspicious. Helena felt trapped inside a narrative she had not chosen, scrutinized by people who had no idea of the battles she fought within herself. She carried the weight quietly, refusing to let her voice tremble or her posture collapse. She endured because she believed that stepping back would validate their cruelty. And yet, every evening, she walked home with a heaviness that settled deep inside her bones. She replayed scenes from rehearsal, examining each gesture, each glance, each moment in which she might have revealed too much. The mirror in her hallway reflected a woman who was losing ground, not to age itself, but to the fear of being reduced to it. Still, amid all the doubt and self-protection, one truth persisted. When Lucas looked at her, she did not feel invisible. And that single truth, fragile and luminous, terrified her more than the rumors ever could. Helena tried to convince herself that the closeness between her and Lucas was nothing more than circumstance. Two people aligned by artistic rhythm, bound by the structure of rehearsals and the demands of the stage. But as the days unfolded, their interactions began to stretch beyond the confines of the script. What once lived only in the shadows of shared glances now lingered in the quiet spaces between rehearsals, in moments suspended just long enough for her heart to register their meaning. It began subtly. After late-night practices, when most of the group dispersed with hurried goodbyes, Lucas stayed behind to help dismantle sets or reorganize props. Helena insisted she could handle it on her own, but he ignored the implication, moving with gentle purpose. She noticed how he handled everything with care. Chairs lifted quietly, fabric folded softly, stage ropes loosened with attentive precision. This lack of hurry, this deliberate dedication, made her feel as though her world was being tended to in ways she had forgotten were possible. One evening, after an exhausting rehearsal of emotionally heavy scenes, Helena sank into one of the front row seats. Her body felt heavier than usual, her breath uneven from a tension that had been building for weeks. Lucas approached after noticing her stillness. He remained a respectful distance away, yet close enough that she could sense the warmth radiating from him. He didn't speak. There were no words allowed in the script of her self-preservation, but he simply stayed there, silently acknowledging the weight she carried. Helena felt the exhaustion soften under his presence, though she forced herself not to lean into it. She rose a moment later, praising his performance with professional restraint, but the warmth that flickered in his eyes stayed with her long after she left the theater. The next day, Lucas arrived earlier than everyone else. When Helena entered the building, she found him adjusting stage lights, a task she usually oversaw alone. He greeted her with a nod that felt almost intimate in its simplicity. The morning light reflected off the dust motes floating in the air, creating a soft halo around him. Helena paused, just briefly, struck by the strange beauty of the moment, the image of a young man willingly stepping into the mundane parts of her world. She continued rehearsals with rigid professionalism, but privately, she felt something shifting. Lucas's presence no longer felt like an echo from her past. It felt like a force shaping her present. He looked at her with a focus she had never learned to accept from anyone. She sensed admiration, respect, and something deeper she refused to name. It unsettled her, not because she doubted its sincerity, but because she feared what embracing it would reveal about her own hidden desires. After rehearsals one night, rain poured heavily against the theater windows, turning the streets into blurred rivers of light. The others hurried home, but Lucas offered to wait inside until the storm softened. Helena knew she should decline, but the truth was, she did not want to face the storm alone, inside or outside the building. She allowed him to stay. They sat in silence on opposite sides of the stage, the sound of rain filling the void between them. Helena traced the worn grooves of the wooden floor with the toe of her shoe, while Lucas watched the shifting patterns of water on the window. There was no spoken confession, no deliberate invitation, just the soft, undeniable recognition of two lives momentarily aligned in vulnerability. The storm outside slowly quieted, but neither moved. Helena felt a warmth expanding inside her, not reckless, not urgent, but tender, like a truth she had resisted acknowledging finally finding the courage to surface. She felt seen, not as a director, not as a mentor, not as a woman aging in a world that worshipped youth, but as herself, in all her complexity. When she finally rose to leave, Lucas walked beside her to the door. The closeness between them, still unspoken, felt like a fragile thread stretching from his chest to hers. She gave a quiet goodnight, her voice steadier than she felt. Lucas nodded, and though he stepped back, the distance between them felt changed. That night, Helena lay awake longer than usual. She tried to silence her thoughts, to classify everything within the safe categories she relied on for survival. But the truth persisted. Something had shifted, crossing the boundary between allowed and forbidden. She felt drawn toward him, not because he represented youth or possibility, but because he saw her without flinching, without judgment. This new awareness frightened her. It also illuminated a part of her she thought had dimmed forever. She hadn't asked for this feeling. She had tried to bury it beneath discipline, routine, and self-preservation. But emotions rarely obeyed logic. They seeped through cracks, defied structure, and emerged in the quietest corners of life. Helena did not yet know where this sentiment would lead. She only knew that something tender had crossed a line inside her, fragile yet undeniable, and she no longer had the power, or perhaps the desire, to push it back. The announcement of the theater festival arrived like a spark dropped into a room full of fragile kindling. The community buzzed with excitement, tension, and the sudden urgency of preparation. For Helena, the news landed differently. While others saw opportunity, she felt the pressure of being thrust into a spotlight she had spent years avoiding. The festival promised a wide audience, jurors from larger cities, journalists from cultural sections of local newspapers, familiar faces she preferred to keep at a distance. Visibility, once a distant memory, now loomed like a looming storm. Her group received the news with enthusiasm, animated voices bouncing through the rehearsal hall. Lucas stood at the center of the excitement, his energy both grounding and electrifying. He proposed performing a new piece, something he had written quietly over the past months. When he shared the concept, Helena felt her breath catch. The themes revolved around time, courage, second chances, and the quiet resilience of lives rebuilt. It was raw yet graceful, poetic yet sharp in its emotional honesty. She recognized herself in the undertones of the script, though he never stated its inspiration. The group voted with immediate approval. Helena wanted to protest, to choose something safer, something more detached from her internal landscape. But Lucas's eyes held a conviction she couldn't deny. He believed in the piece, not for his own ego, but because he sensed its ability to transform the performance into something authentic. And so they began. Rehearsals shifted into a new intensity. The theater filled with the smell of fresh paint as sets were refurbished, with fabric dust from altered costumes, with the metallic hum of tools adjusting lights. Helena guided the process with practiced determination, though beneath her instructions pulsed a growing anxiety. The closer the festival approached, the more she felt exposed, not by the script itself, but by the emotional gravity it carried. Lucas remained steady through it all. He worked long hours, rewriting certain sections, choreographing subtle movements, offering support to the cast without overshadowing anyone. Yet Helena felt his attention return to her like a constant tide. Every time she shifted into self-protection, Lucas countered with a gesture of unexpected thoughtfulness. A chair moved closer when she seemed tired. Warm tea left quietly on the edge of the stage during cold evenings, lighting adjustments that softened the harsh glare she hated. These gestures did not blur boundaries. They revealed sincerity. And sincerity, Helena realized, was a far more dangerous force than desire. Reporters began contacting her. Small at first, requests for interviews about the group's history, pictures of rehearsals, comments about the upcoming performance. Helena declined as many as she could. She preferred the backstage world, the quiet creation, not the exposure. But with the festival came a responsibility she could not entirely avoid. And the community, with its hunger for spectacle, started paying attention. She noticed more people lingering at the doorway during rehearsals. Curious townsfolk, other artists, gossipers disguised as supporters. The rumors that had already been swirling between her and Lucas now found a larger audience. She felt their eyes on her, calculating, measuring, judging. Every proximity between her and Lucas seemed amplified under this scrutiny. One afternoon, while she adjusted a backdrop with trembling hands, she heard two cast members whispering near the wings. Their words weren't malicious, but they carried the sting of assumption. They discussed the chemistry, the favoritism, the inevitability of older women clinging to younger men. Helena froze for a moment before steadying her breath and continuing her task, her palms slightly damp. Lucas noticed the tension. He approached her later that evening, standing close but not too close, his expression calm but concerned. He didn't touch her. He didn't mention the whispers, but the quiet gravity in his eyes told her he understood the storm silently forming around her. His empathy reached her like a gentle light, but she feared what embracing it could cost her. As the festival neared, Helena's anxiety grew sharper. She felt responsible for the group's reputation, for the execution of the performance, for the delicate emotional balance within herself. The weight of being seen, truly seen, was heavier than she remembered. She longed to hide behind the curtain, to surrender the responsibilities, to step away from the vulnerable center of attention. And yet, every time she considered retreat, she found Lucas rehearsing alone on stage, embodying each line with the quiet depth of someone carrying more than the script demanded. His dedication grounded her. It reminded her that art was not meant to be lived in fear, but in truth. Still, she could not ignore the growing panic that tightened her chest with each passing day. The festival lights were coming. They would illuminate everything, every mark of time on her face, every rumor shadowing her reputation, every unspoken feeling pulsing between her and Lucas. She wanted shadows. She wanted safety. But the world was preparing to shine its light directly on her. The shift from admiration to suspicion happened quietly, as such shifts often do, born in the small minds of those who feared what they could not understand. The festival's approaching spotlight sharpened every rumor, every half-formed thought, every cruel whisper too weak to face the truth directly. Helena began to feel the world turning against her in ways more suffocating than she had anticipated. It began one morning when she arrived at the theater to find an unusual tension in the air. The cast members moved differently, quicker glances, quieter conversations, stiffened shoulders when she walked by. At first, she dismissed it as performance anxiety, but she soon noticed how certain eyes lingered on her longer than necessary, searching for signs of guilt she had not committed. A few avoided meeting her gaze entirely, The cause revealed itself that afternoon. One of the younger actresses hesitated before handing Helena her costume notes, her fingers trembling slightly. Helena, accustomed to reading emotional undercurrents, sensed a fear not of her authority, but of something unspoken. When the actress rushed away, Helena felt a chill rise inside her. Something had been said. Something had spread. She found out later through a discreet message from an older cast member, a screenshot of an anonymous post circulating online. It hinted at inappropriate favoritism, suggesting that Lucas had secured his leading role through private rehearsals with the director. The post never mentioned her name, but it didn't need to. The implication was clear enough. A woman of her age, working closely with a much younger man, must have ulterior motives. The cruelty of the assumption cut deeply, not because she feared it was true, but because she had spent years constructing a life of integrity, only to have it reduced to a caricature with a single insinuation. Helena stared at the screen for a long time. The words crawled beneath her skin like cold water. She felt a mix of anger, humiliation, and something far more painful, a sense of helplessness. She had lived long enough to know how quickly reputations could be dismantled, especially for women who dared exist outside the expectations assigned to them. She closed her phone and placed it face down on the table, willing her breath to steady. But the humiliation lingered, sticking to her ribs like damp fabric. When she returned to rehearsal, she held her posture straight, her voice steady, her tone precise. She refused to let anyone glimpse the fracture inside her. Lucas sensed it immediately. His eyes followed her more closely that evening, not with possessiveness but with alarm, an unspoken awareness that something had hurt her. Helena avoided his gaze, not out of anger but out of fear that her vulnerability would spill over if she allowed him even a second of access. During scene work, their distance became noticeable. She corrected him with formality she had never used before, while he obeyed with a quiet confusion that trembled beneath the surface. Others sensed the tension and interpreted it in ways that only fueled their suspicions. Helena felt trapped inside a narrative she had not written. She stayed late that night, long after the cast had left, walking the length of the stage with slow, deliberate steps. The theater felt colder than usual, its once comforting air now filled with shadows of judgment. She lifted her gaze to the empty balcony, imagining rows of invisible critics waiting to devour her dignity. Her chest tightened. She pressed a hand there, not for comfort, but to ground herself against the rising panic. Helena knew she had done nothing wrong, but innocence did not erase pain. Nor did it shield her from the harshness of a community eager to devour anything it could not categorize neatly. Age gaps, especially when reversed, particularly disturbed the fragile egos of those who believed love belonged only to the young. She found Lucas waiting for her at the exit. He stood with his bag slung over his shoulder, the dim hallway lights casting soft shadows along his face. He didn't step closer, though she could see he wanted to. His eyes searched hers quietly, trying to understand the distance she had created. Helena kept her expression neutral. She murmured a brief farewell and moved past him. The air between them felt like a rope pulled tight, fraying at its center. As she walked home, each step felt heavy, as though gravity itself had turned personal. The streets blurred beneath the glow of street lamps, and she found herself wishing for the anonymity she once resented. She longed for invisibility, not the emotional invisibility she fought all her life, but the safety of being overlooked by those who judged too quickly. Later that night, she stood in front of her bathroom mirror, the harsh lights highlighting every insecurity the rumors had awakened. She studied her reflection, searching for faults she had ignored. The mirror offered no mercy. She traced the lines around her mouth, the softness beneath her jaw, the tiredness in her eyes. She wondered how the world could reduce her entire existence to a single cruel insinuation. She wondered what Lucas saw when he looked at her. That question lingered as she crawled into bed, exhausted beyond sleep. She felt the emotional crack widening between the world she had built and the world others imposed upon her. She feared it might swallow her whole if she didn't learn how to withstand it. Outside, the festival lights continued to draw nearer, and Helena, trapped between duty, emotion, and public scrutiny, braced herself for a judgment she had never invited. Helena woke the next morning with the kind of heaviness that settles into the bones, not from lack of sleep, but from emotional exhaustion. The rumors had carved silent wounds inside her, the kind she knew would leave marks no one else could see. She had survived many storms in her life: divorce, disappointment, loneliness, but this one felt different. This one demanded a sacrifice she had hoped never to make. She arrived at rehearsal with a decision sealed inside her. She needed distance from Lucas. It was not a choice born of resentment. It was born of fear. Fear of being the reason his reputation suffered. Fear of giving their critics ammunition. Fear of destroying a young man's future with her presence. She believed stepping back was an act of protection, not rejection. But she underestimated how deeply this retreat would cut both of them. From the moment rehearsal began, Helena enforced strict boundaries. She addressed Lucas with the same tone she used for the entire cast: cold, objective, methodical. She reduced her corrections to short technical notes. She remained on the opposite side of the stage whenever possible. Her eyes avoided lingering on him, and she responded to his every attempt at proximity with subtle but unmistakable withdrawal. Lucas noticed. Of course he noticed. His movements lost their former ease, replaced with a controlled restraint that mirrored hers. Each time he approached to ask a question, she redirected him to another cast member. Each time he tried to catch her eye, she turned away. It wasn't cruelty, it was self-defense. But Lucas felt the distance as abandonment, even if he didn't understand the reason. The cast sensed the change too. The absence of warmth between director and actor confirmed the rumors for those who wanted to believe them, while confusing those who had seen genuine respect between them before. Helena felt the shift ripple through the room like a cold front, chilling everything it touched. That afternoon, during a break, Helena retreated to the costume room to breathe. The small, cluttered space smelled of old fabric and preserved memories. She closed her eyes and rested her hands on a rack of costumes, grounding herself. She tried not to think of Lucas, of his confusion, of the hurt she had seen flicker across his face when she dismissed him earlier. But the image stayed with her, tightening her chest. She reminded herself why she was doing this. She told herself it was necessary, that love, or whatever fragile thing pulsed between them, demanded sacrifice. She had lived long enough to understand that sometimes the noblest form of protection was distance. Still, the logic did nothing to dull the ache spreading beneath her ribs. When she returned to the stage, Lucas was running lines with another actor. His voice was steady, but his posture was tense. The soft openness he once carried had retreated, replaced by a quiet hurt he tried to hide. The sight nearly broke her resolve, but she forced herself to remain composed. Later that evening, as the cast packed up, Helena found Lucas near the exit, adjusting a strap on his bag with nervous fingers. He glanced at her, and something in his eyes trembled. An unspoken question, a plea for explanation. She held herself rigid, offering him nothing but a curt nod. Lucas swallowed hard, stepping aside to let her pass. His silence struck deeper than any accusation. It held disappointment, confusion, and the beginning of a bruise she had inflicted with her own hands. Helena walked home in the fading light, the weight of her choice becoming heavier with each step. She did not cry. She had cried enough in private spaces throughout her life, but her heart pulsed with the grief of unfulfilled longing. She convinced herself that distance would spare them both. She did not realize that the absence she created was its own kind of cruelty. That night she struggled to sleep. The house felt emptier than usual. Her thoughts drifted to Lucas's hurt expression, the warmth she had once felt from him, the way he had brought something alive in her she thought had died long ago. She longed for the comfort of his presence even as she forced herself to accept its loss. Rehearsals in the following days became mechanical. Helena buried herself in directing, using precision and discipline as armor. She treated Lucas like any other actor, though internally she replayed every moment they had shared. Lucas responded with increasing silence. He still worked hard, still respected her authority, but the quiet thread that once connected them had thinned dangerously. Helena kept her distance, believing this sacrifice was temporary, believing it was necessary. She told herself the storm would pass, that the rumors would fade, that she and Lucas would find a calmer space to exist. But she underestimated how much damage silence could inflict. In her attempt to protect him, she created a void neither of them knew how to fill. And as the festival drew closer, Helena felt the consequences of her choice settling around her like a cold fog, dimming the light she had once found in both the stage and in him. The night of the festival arrived wrapped in a tension that felt almost ritualistic. Helena woke before dawn, unable to sleep, her mind moving through every detail of the performance with obsessive precision. Costumes steamed and prepared, lighting cues checked repeatedly, stage markings reviewed until they blurred. Beneath the technical concerns pulsed an unspoken fear. Tonight, she would be seen. Not through interviews or online rumors, but through the gaze of an entire auditorium filled with people who believed they already knew who she was. She dressed carefully, choosing garments that carried dignity rather than attention. A dark blouse, a simple skirt, hair pinned with deliberate restraint. As she looked in the mirror, she felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the quiet dread that came from being observed rather than witnessing. The reflection stared back at her with the weight of a woman who had survived too much to crumble, but still carried fractures beneath her skin. The city buzzed with anticipation as she approached the theater. Posters lined the streets, showcasing participating groups with glossy confidence. The old municipal building, usually quiet and cavernous, pulsed with life. People crowded near the entrance, exchanging excitement, critique, gossip. Cameras flickered. Journalists hovered near the doors. The air tasted of old wood, stage dust, and a hint of perfume from attendees dressed for the occasion. Inside, the lobby filled quickly. Helena could hear the voices of cast members echoing against the marble walls. She moved through the crowd with the focus of someone trying not to drown. When she entered the backstage area, the familiar scent of makeup, fabric, and tension wrapped around her like an anchor. The cast prepared in clusters, touching up costumes, reviewing lines, pacing in small circles. Lucas stood near the far wall, adjusting the cuffs of his costume. He looked composed, but she could see the subtle tension in his jaw, the controlled rhythm of his breathing. They hadn't shared more than a few curt exchanges in days. Seeing him now, illuminated by the warm backstage lights, stirred something she tried to suppress, but she couldn't ignore the shift in him. Lucas was no longer the quietly wounded figure from the previous rehearsals. Something in his eyes tonight held a sense of resolve, an inner flame that had grown sharper, steadier. She sensed he was carrying something unspoken, something that would not be contained by rehearsal boundaries or private restraint. Helena focused on her duties. She checked props, called the cast for vocal warm-ups, monitored the stage crew. Her voice remained firm, her posture upright, her expression calm. Yet beneath the surface, her emotions churned, caught between dread and anticipation. Minutes before the doors opened, she stepped into the wings to observe the auditorium. The seats stretched out like a sea of expectant faces. Every row filled steadily. Locals, critics, families, curious spectators, former students, acquaintances she had avoided for years. Helena inhaled slowly, fighting the rising panic. She felt exposed even before anything had begun. The soft hum of the audience intensified as the theater lights dimmed. Cast members gathered near their first positions, each adjusting their breath to the gravity of the moment. Helena stood at the side, her clipboard pressed against her ribs, her eyes following every detail with meticulous devotion. She looked toward Lucas one more time. He met her gaze unexpectedly, not with the fragile longing of earlier days, but with quiet determination. It unsettled her, not because it frightened her, but because it felt like a promise she did not understand. The show began. As the first scene unfolded, the stage transformed into a world shaped by Lucas's script, raw, poetic, shimmering with human truth. The cast delivered their lines with precision, their movements fluid under Helena's months of guidance. But as the performance progressed, she sensed an undercurrent rising, something not entirely written in the script. The audience reacted with rapt attention. Helena could hear their breaths align with the emotional beats of the performance. Soft inhalations, quiet murmurs, an occasional stifled sob. Yet she remained anchored to the wings, her gaze drifting between the stage and the audience, aware of every reaction. Lucas's presence on stage was magnetic. He moved with an intensity that felt almost confessional, as though he carried personal truth within each gesture. Helena felt it before anyone else, the subtle shift in tone, the emotional gravity thickening around him. The show was reaching the moment he had rewritten privately, the moment she had not fully understood in rehearsals. Her heartbeat quickened. She sensed the shape of something approaching, something inevitable. The scenes moved forward like waves building toward a crest. Helena's palms began to sweat. The audience leaned in, unaware of the emotional fault line about to open beneath them. In the quiet stretch between two acts, Helena stepped deeper into the wings, fighting a trembling she couldn't control. She didn't know what Lucas intended, but she felt it. Something within him was about to break the barrier between art and confession. When he stepped into the spotlight for the pivotal scene, the room shifted. Everything fell silent, as if the theater itself were holding its breath. Helena felt her own breath catch. Something irreversible was about to unfold. The spotlight found Lucas with unwavering intensity, illuminating every contour of his expression. The stage around him dimmed into shadows, drawing the audience toward him as if gravity itself had shifted. Helena stood in the wings, hidden from sight but fully exposed inside her ribcage, every heartbeat echoing like a warning she could no longer decipher. The scene began as scripted, his character reflecting on time, loss, and the courage to begin again. But as he spoke, something changed. His voice carried a depth that did not belong to the lines she had approved, a trembling sincerity that felt too raw, too intimate, too real. The audience sensed it too. The silence deepened, becoming almost sacred. Lucas took a step forward. His breath hitched, not from nerves, but from the weight of what he was about to reveal. He spoke of a woman, unnamed, unmarked by details, yet unmistakably present in every metaphor. A woman who had lived through storms without recognition, who had rebuilt herself quietly, who carried the kind of strength that did not demand applause. A woman the world overlooked until someone finally learned how to see her. Helena's throat tightened. She knew this was no longer the script. He continued, each word forming a bridge between confession and performance. He described how this woman moved through life with cautious grace, unaware of how profoundly she shaped the hearts around her, how she believed time had stolen her softness, when in truth, it had only sharpened it into something luminous, how her presence grounded him in ways he had never understood before. The audience listened with rapt attention. Some shifted in their seats, sensing the vulnerability blooming before them. Others leaned forward, caught by the rising emotional current. A few exchanged glances, trying to decipher whether they were witnessing art or truth. Helena knew. Her heart pounded in her ears. Her palms dampened. Her breath shallowly pulled itself in and out of her lungs. She wanted to step back, to vanish into the backstage darkness before anyone could connect the dots. But she remained rooted, unable to turn away from the seismic shift unfolding in front of her. Lucas's voice dropped to a lower, steadier register. He spoke of courage, not the kind performed for an audience, but the quiet courage of choosing someone despite the world's scrutiny. He spoke of age not as a boundary, but as a landscape full of history, depth, and quiet beauty. He rejected the notion that youth defined worth, or that love must conform to expectations shaped by fear. He spoke of a woman who taught him to see differently, a woman who had changed him. He never said her name. He didn't have to. The auditorium felt suspended between heartbeats. Helena sensed hundreds of eyes shifting subconsciously toward the wings, toward her, toward the invisible axis around which the scene now revolved. She lowered her head, feeling heat rise to her face, a mix of emotion she could not fully name. Shame, gratitude, fear, wonder. Lucas paused. The silence thickened. Then he delivered the line that did not exist in any script she had approved. Some truths cannot remain in the dark simply because others prefer it that way. The words fell into the room like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples that touched every corner. Lucas's gaze lifted toward the wings, toward her, and though his eyes did not seek permission, they offered understanding. A silent acknowledgement. I see you. I know what this costs you. But truth deserves light. Helena felt her pulse tremble. Her knees weakened. Everything she had worked to conceal, her fear, her longing, her heartbreak, threatened to surface. The audience held its breath. Lucas continued the monologue, seamlessly blending the original script with the emotional truth he had woven into it. His performance transcended acting. It was raw testimony cloaked in art. The lines moved through themes of rediscovery, unexpected tenderness, and the bravery required to embrace affection that defied assumptions. By the time the monologue ended, the audience was motionless. A silence stretched so deeply that Helena could hear the faint hum of the stage lights. Lucas stepped back into the shadows of the set, his expression soft but unbroken, his breathing steady as though he had just released something long held captive. The scene shifted into the next act, but the audience had not fully returned from the emotional terrain he had taken them to. Helena sensed it, their stunned stillness, their searching glances, their quiet attempts to understand what they had just witnessed. Some watched the actors now on stage, others looked toward the wings again, their curiosity sharpened. Helena stepped deeper into the shadows, willing her heartbeat to quiet. Her chest ached, not from pain, but from the intensity of emotion she had spent years suppressing. His words had touched something abandoned inside her, something she feared to name, but could no longer deny existed. As the final scenes unfolded, Helena barely moved. She watched Lucas in the remaining moments, seeing the subtle tremor beneath his control, the exhaustion that followed vulnerability, the sincerity he never hid. She wondered how she could ever distance herself again after what he had done, how she could pretend not to feel what had now been illuminated before an entire audience. When the lights dimmed and the final blackout signaled the end, the theater erupted in applause, loud, thunderous, insistent. But this applause felt different. It wasn't just appreciation for performance. It carried something deeper, heavier, a recognition of truth hidden in art, a respect born from witnessing a raw emotional offering. And Helena knew that nothing in her life would be the same after this night. The applause rose like a tide, filling the theater with a force that seemed almost physical. Helena remained in the wings, partially hidden behind the curtain, as the sound washed over the stage and seeped into the quiet corners where she stood. It was not the applause itself that shook her. It was what it carried, something deeper than appreciation, heavier than praise. It felt like the audience was acknowledging a truth they could not fully articulate, a truth she had spent years burying beneath discipline and restraint. Her hands trembled slightly. She pressed them together, grounding herself with slow, deliberate breaths. The performance was over. The lights, still warm on the floorboards, cast long shadows that seemed to stretch toward her, inviting her to step into a space she had avoided all her life. She felt the weight of the evening settle on her chest, a mix of fear, relief, and something like awakening. Backstage erupted in muffled celebration. Cast members embraced, laughed, exchanged congratulations. Helena could hear their voices, but they felt distant, as though coming from another world. Her world had become the small square of space she occupied in the wings, the threshold between exposure and escape. Then someone called her name. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. One of the younger crew members gestured gently toward the stage. The applause continued, steady and insistent, an unspoken invitation for the director to appear. Tradition demanded it. Etiquette expected it. But tonight, stepping onto that stage felt like crossing a line she had drawn years ago to protect the fragile parts of herself. For a moment, she considered remaining where she was, letting the cast take the bow, letting the moment pass her by. But then she remembered Lucas's monologue, his voice trembling with truth, his refusal to hide what the world insisted should remain unseen, his willingness to offer part of himself in front of hundreds so that she would no longer feel small. Cowardice, she realized, would be a disservice to everything he had done. She lifted her chin, steadied her breath, and stepped forward. The moment she emerged from the shadows, the applause changed. It deepened, warmed, grew louder, not with the enthusiasm reserved for actors, but with something closer to respect. Some rose from their seats. Others stilled completely, watching her with a kind of reverent curiosity. She felt their eyes trace her steps, not with mockery or judgment, but with the dawning realization that she had been part of something larger than the performance. Helena walked slowly toward the center of the stage. The lights bathed her in a glow that softened her edges, turning her presence into something almost ethereal. She blinked against the brightness, her heart beating hard enough to echo in her ribs. She forced herself not to look for Lucas. Not yet. She needed to stand on her own before seeking the comfort his gaze offered. The cast formed a semicircle behind her. She could feel their shifting breaths, their tremors of excitement. But the room belonged to her now. For the first time in years, she stood fully visible. Not as a teacher, not as a director, not as a woman afraid of scrutiny, but as herself. Her throat tightened. It began as a warm pressure behind her eyes. Then a single tear slipped down her cheek, carving a path she did not bother to hide. Another followed, then another. She lifted a hand halfway, intending to wipe them away, but stopped. Instead, she let the tears fall freely, her vulnerability laid bare in front of the audience. The reaction was immediate. The applause softened, transforming into a quieter, more intimate recognition, as though the audience understood they were witnessing something private. Her tears were not a sign of weakness. They were a release, a breaking open of the shell she had built to survive. She felt movement beside her. Lucas stepped forward, not touching her, not speaking, simply standing at her side, allowing his presence to steady the air around them. The audience noticed. A wave of whispers swept across the auditorium. Not cruel this time, but contemplative. Something in the collective gaze of the room shifted. The rumors that had once painted her as desperate or inappropriate now seemed hollow in the face of the authenticity radiating between them. Helena did not look at Lucas, but she felt him, felt the steadiness in his breath, the grounded calm he offered her without demanding acknowledgement. She knew his gesture on stage had changed everything. It had destroyed the anonymity she once clung to, but it had also given her back something far greater, the right to inhabit her life without apology. After a long moment, the cast bowed. Helena followed, her movements fluid despite the tremor in her chest. When she lifted her head again, she felt the room differently. It was no longer a crowd ready to judge her. It was a crowd seeing her for the first time. As the curtains closed, she exhaled a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She turned slightly, meeting Lucas's gaze at last. His eyes held no triumph, no expectation, only quiet understanding. A recognition of what they had survived. They did not touch. They did not speak. But something settled between them. A truth no rumor could undo. Helena stepped off the stage, still trembling, still breathless, but lighter. For the first time in years, she felt the world expand rather than shrink around her. Whatever came next, gossip, approval, uncertainty, would arrive on a foundation no longer built on fear. Lucas walked beside her, matching her pace, offering nothing but presence. It was enough.